You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 20th of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. Coming up on today's programme, Italian opposition parties protest an effort by the government to play down a citizenship referendum. Anita Riota, what can you tell us?
Well, for any Latin fans out there, it's we're having a Ius Soli versus Ius Sanguinis showdown today on the show. So it'll be interesting to get into what that means for citizens in Italy.
More from Anita and Fernando Augusto Pacheco in a moment. After that, we'll look at a new grim milestone of 80 million internally displaced people around the world. We'll also get news from the UAE and its take on Gaza. And after that, Sophie Grove is here to walk us through Konfekt's summer issue. What do you have for us, Sophie?
We've just sent the magazine to press in Germany and it's a real ode to summer. So there's a wonderful night train. We're in Cairo shooting all the looks of the season. Lots of Mediterranean spots. So I can't wait to share them with you.
Very jealous I didn't get to do the night train story. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Voter participation is supposed to be welcome in a democracy, but in Italy there's been a curious battle developing over a referendum on citizenship that's planned for next month. Right-wing groups are calling for citizens to abstain in the referendum, which would allow residents to apply for citizenship after 5 years and children of immigrants to obtain citizenship for the first time before they are of adult age. At the same time, and somewhat paradoxically, the Italian parliament is passing a measure that prevents second and third generation foreigners with Italian roots from seeking citizenship from Italy. One hand giveth, the other taketh away, etc., etc. I'm joined in the studio now by Anita Riota, Monocle Radio's producer of the Foreign Desk, and Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle Radio's senior correspondent. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chris.
So you're sort of taking opposite sides, different perspectives on this story. Anita, I'm going to start with you to explain this sort of strange situation that Italy finds itself in. How did this referendum come about when the Meloni government opposes it?
Well, this question has been a long-running issue in Italy. It has been a topic of conversation for a long time. Italy has some of the strictest regulations around citizenship in Europe, so it is brought to the forefront also when you see that you diverge from your neighbors in a pretty substantial way. But it was brought back into the cultural, political conversation last summer, actually, when Italy did exceptionally well at the Paris Olympics, led in part by their multicultural athletes. In volleyball, Italy won its first ever Olympic gold, led by Paola Egonu, who was born in northern Italy to Nigerian parents. And it sort of brought back to the forefront of why are we not investing in this talent? And sort of their first language is Italian. They're born in Italy. They play on all of our sort of national teams. Why are we not able to embrace these children that we've raised? And so it just brought it back to the forefront. It splintered a bit the Meloni coalition for a while, with Salvini being vehemently against birthright citizenship, Tahani having a sort of softer approach to it for a while. But now the coalition has rallied around abstaining in this referendum.
Well, and this is what's interesting, right? They're rallying around abstaining from a referendum that was not there by their choice. This was signatures gathered. But why? This is what opposition parties are also protesting. But why go for abstention instead of a clean yes or no? You could also just tell everyone vote against this measure.
I think it is very strange, and opposition parties have taken to the streets. There were mass protests in Rome and around the country yesterday, led by opposition leaders, saying that the government is essentially participating in an anti-democracy campaign. The opposition leaders are saying, if you are so confident in your camp and that you have the numbers, why are you telling your voters to stay home? Well, the reason that the government is telling voters to stay home is, as this this is a referendum, if they don't reach 50% of the total voting population, so if they don't reach 50% voter turnout, no matter if the question wins 100% yes, that result does not count. So it is quite sad in a way that they are preaching disaffection over a resolution that gained 500,000 signatures. And turnout in Italy is actually a very big issue at the moment. Meloni was elected with what was then record turnout, a record low turnout. And then in 2024, for the first time, we saw voter turnout go under 50% in Italy. So it seems that in a pretty shrewd but not encouraging way, the government seems to be leaning on people's disaffection with politics.
Politically shrewd, but not something that promises civic engagement. Fernando, we're going to discuss, I'll start that whole thought again. We're going to discuss with you a kind of separate but related aspect to this, because as I understand, the Italian parliament, separate from the referendum, is also voting on this idea of whether second, third generation families, people who moved abroad, can actually get Italian citizenship.
And this decision will heavily affect lots of Brazilian citizens and Argentinian as well. Chris, the numbers are huge. I was looking at them again to say the correct thing here on the briefing. 30 million Brazilians have Italian ancestry. That's a big number. That's 15% of our population. And according to the current Italian law, 15% of the Brazilian population could potentially have an Italian citizenship if they wanted, if they go to the court, if they go to the consulate. That's a huge number. And there's been an increasing number of Brazilians who wanted to, come to Europe, not necessarily perhaps live in Italy, but they want to apply. I know so many of my friends, Brazilians that live in London. That's why it's sometimes very hard to quantify the Brazilian community in certain places because of that citizenship. And I was also looking at another incredible stat from Brazilians with EU passports. 44% of them was via Italy. More than Portugal, more than Spain, more than Germany. So it's remarkable. And it's also, I have to say, a multi-millionaire business in the country of those companies that help actually Brazilians, to go through Italian courts. Because I have to say, some of those Italian courts, they can be quite small. Because the Italian immigration to Brazil, they were, I believe, from the region of Veneto in their majority, which is not even the biggest cities of Italy. And some of those courts in Italy, they were even complaining. Enough of Brazilians asking for citizenship. So it'll be huge, huge changes in how Brazilians will apply for an Italian passport.
And Fernando, to stick with you for a moment on that, even aside from this bureaucratic element and sort of Italian courts overloaded, part of the problem, of course, is Italians may be worried about Brazilians coming, this clampdown on immigration. But do Brazilians and other Latin Americans actually come to Italy as a result of this? Or is it more something they want either to go in other parts of Europe or even just to have Italian citizenship?
You know what? More and more. Of course, when the immigration happened in the 19th century, early 20th century, the majority of them wanted a new life in a new continent because of the tough conditions in Europe at the time. But now it's quite the opposite. Most Brazilians dream with this kind of living in Europe, having kind of this the sense of safety, perhaps better salaries as well. And as I said, the numbers keep on increasing of Brazilians and Argentinians applying for this passport. So this dream is very much alive. So that's why people are concerned, and they want to see, is this even legal? Perhaps this decision that the Italian parliament will decide. So there's a lot of kind of articles about that and how to actually to help out those citizens as well.
And if I can just jump in on this one, I think, Fernando, that's exactly why, in a way, these two different questions are actually the two different sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. Because on one hand, if you have millions of people applying every year with very tenuous connections to the country, and then that gives them access to the entire EU, that's not really bringing money into the Italian economy. It's not really helping with an aging population. It's not really helping with a lowering birth rate. But if you are empowering people born in the country, getting jobs in the country, getting their educations in the country, and maybe, then feeling more comfortable to have families of their own and raise their children there, then you are combating all three of those things. An economy that suffers sometimes with stagnating, an aging population, and a declining birth rate. So in a way, they really are two different ways of tackling the same issue.
Anita Riotta and Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Laura Kramer with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. U.S. President Donald Trump says Russia and Ukraine are ready to begin ceasefire negotiations immediately. The announcement came after his call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin countered by saying the process would take time. Taiwanese President William Lai says his country wants peace and dialogue with China, but will continue to strengthen their defenses. Beijing continues to call Lai a separatist and refuses his offer for talks. And New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art has returned 3 ancient artworks it believes were looted to Iraq. The artifacts were returned in an official ceremony which received praise from Iraq's ambassador to the UN. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Laura. Now, in an age of global conflicts that are leading Western nations to close their borders, many countries around the world are dealing with internal displacements instead. The number of internally displaced people topped 80 million for the first time in 2024. That's according to a new report from the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. And I'm joined now by Alexandra Bilak, who's director of the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. Alexandra, thanks very much for coming on the show. There are a lot of different aspects to this and how people are displaced in our current time, but it does start with conflicts like Sudan and Gaza. Those are the ones where there are more internally displaced than anywhere else.
Yes, hello indeed, and thank you for having me. This year's report, as you said, is revealing record numbers of people living in internal displacement, meaning they have been forced out of their homes by conflicts, but also by disasters. And as you said, at the end of 2024, there were over 83 million of them. Now, out of those 83 million people, 73.5 million are displaced as a result of conflict and violence across 61 countries and territories in the world. And half of them are concentrated in just 5 countries. Sudan, which for the second year in a row in 2024 has hosted the largest number of IDPs in the world, but also followed closely by countries like Syria, like Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Yemen. These are all protracted conflicts that are leading to protracted displacement situations, which mean that many of these IDPs have been living in displacement for years, for sometimes even decades, and they're struggling to find durable solutions. So yes, this report paints a very bleak global picture. And one which we're particularly concerned about could last for years to come.
And there are, of course, different ways of looking at these numbers, Alexandra. You focused on those conflicts where you have the highest number, but then you also look at a place like Gaza, which perhaps because its population is not as large, isn't among those 5, and yet nearly the entire population of the Gaza Strip is currently displaced.
Absolutely. And in fact, our report reports on 2 different types of phenomena. On the one hand, the total number of people who are displaced in a country. So this is displacement in absolute terms. But it also reports on the number of movements that are recorded over the course of a year. And that's where the dynamics of internal displacement become apparent. And as you said, in a place like Gaza, where we're recording relatively speaking, fewer numbers of people displaced, 2 million. This is almost the majority. It's 95% of the entire population that has been forced out of their home. But if you look at the number of movements over the course of the year, you see that these people are being displaced repeatedly. Some families have been displaced up to hundreds of times as they respond to airstrikes and as they flee with their families to safety. So the dynamism, the repeated nature of internal displacement, particularly in insecure environments like Gaza, is a clear trend that we've seen also in other countries. Ukraine was another example back in 2022. We also see repeated movements in disaster contexts. If you think about the seasonality of certain disasters, that also pushes people to move multiple times during the course of a year.
And touch a little more on the disasters aspect of that for us, because that is something that is obviously also hitting countries that are not in conflict. Even within the United States, we're seeing increasing displacement due to storms.
Absolutely. The report highlights once again that disaster displacement is very much a global phenomenon that is affecting both high-income and low-income countries. Of course, the impacts are not the same and are very much determined. The severity of a disaster displacement will be determined by a number of socioeconomic factors. But we've seen extremely high numbers of hurricane and wildfire-related displacements in the United States last year, 11 million movements, and consistently high levels of displacements that are driven by other weather events like floods, like storms across Asia and the Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Americas, and even Europe. So it is a global phenomenon. The number of movements is extremely high. But the number of people who will remain in a situation of displacement following a disaster will be determined by their vulnerability and their ability to recover from such a disaster. So, of course, a country like the United States, we don't predict this displacement to become protracted or long term in the same way as it would in a country in sub-Saharan Africa. But it does nevertheless reveal that populations are highly exposed, that it's an extremely disaster-prone country, and that the government is reacting with early warning systems and preemptive evacuations that are, of course, life-saving measures.
Just finally, Alexandra, when you put all of this together, we speak so much about the political challenges with the West sort of closing its borders to immigration, but is internal displacement even recognized as a problem within that? What do countries actually do about it?
Well, it's true that for a long time, internal displacement was the forgotten phenomenon, if I may say, in the global debates around human mobility. There was much more focus on, of course, on cross-border migration, on refugee flows, than there was on internal displacement. But over the last few years, I think we've been quite successful in demonstrating not just the global footprint of this issue, but also the way in which it affects countries' long-term stability, their future development, and how, in a sense, if internal displacement goes unaddressed, it can have a number of knock-on effects, including for cross-border movements. So there is now much more political recognition of the issue, much more national and global level investment in integrating internal displacement in national policies, in connecting it to climate change adaptation, to disaster risk reduction, to sustainable development, and of course to peace building. So it's still insufficient, but I would say that progress is happening.
Alexandra Bilek, Director of the Internal Displacement Monitoring Centre, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and it's time now for a roundup of news from the UAE, and for that we are joined by Inzamam Rashid, journalist and broadcaster based in Dubai. Inzi, thanks very much for joining us. We are going to start with Gaza, which we did hear a little bit about in the previous item, because there has been a lot of movement on this in the past 24 hours. Israel saying it plans, or Netanyahu saying Israel plans to take control of the enclave, the UK, France, Canada threatening with sanctions. How is all of that going down where you are?
Yeah, afternoon from Dubai, Chris. It's no surprise that this story is pretty much on the top of every publication across the UAE and across the GCC, to be quite frank. And as you mentioned, this all started when the UK, France, and Canada yesterday released a joint statement urging Israel to cease its latest military offensive, which then in turn prompted a pretty angry response from Benjamin Netanyahu. And this all came off the back of Israel ending its 11-week blockade on aid entering Gaza yesterday, albeit only 5 trucks being able to enter into Gaza, which the UN said was a drop in the ocean. And despite all of this, Israel continued their airstrikes on the enclave. The Palestinian health officials saying around 60 people were killed across Gaza overnight and into the morning. And now people here in the UAE, leaders in the UAE and in other Gulf countries saying that that really undermines any potential peace talks between the two nations.
Tell us more about that, the UAE's response to this. Does the UAE want to play a role also in terms of Arab nations playing a role in trying to still mediate some kind of ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, look, the UAE, Qatar as well. Qatar has been a focal point for bringing peace between Israel and Gaza. What the UAE today have said is that the attack that took place on the Hamad Prosthetics Hospital in the Gaza Strip, which resulted in deaths and injuries, they have condemned it in the strongest terms, saying that the Israeli aggression and military escalation would threaten to cause further loss of life and make the humanitarian catastrophe in the Strip worse. They, again, as they often do, called on the international community to intensify all regional and international efforts to find serious political horizon. But what's happened in Qatar over the last couple of hours has been interesting. The Prime Minister has been speaking at an economic forum, and he has said, this is Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman, he has said that any attempt of ceasefire negotiations in Doha haven't led anywhere because of fundamental differences between the parties involved. But what he's also said is that the overnight military offensive in Gaza by Israel has now undermined any peace efforts and pushed things even further back. This is all going on whilst aid still struggles to get into Gaza. Only 5 trucks announced, which were allowed in yesterday. It's believed the UN have just got approval to send in around 100 aid lorries into Gaza, potentially over the next few days. But what the UN are saying is that they need around 600 or so trucks a day for any kind of impact to happen for the people of Gaza.
Well, Inzi, this is a story we will continue to follow on Monocle Radio, but I wanted to ask you about a couple of other things you have for us. One, that there's flying taxi trials about to begin in the UAE. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it kind of just, when you think of that, about this kind of stuff, flying taxi, low flying helicopters dropping people off, it sounds a bit like science fiction, but it is happening. And Al Ain, a part of the UAE, one of the Emirates here, will actually be a testing ground for the UAE's flying taxis, and that will happen this summer. If it all goes to plan, then by the end of the year, you could be soaring over the desert between Dubai and Abu Dhabi in just 20 minutes. It takes around an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, if the traffic's pretty bad, to get to Abu Dhabi from Dubai. You could be making that journey in about 15 to 20 minutes, but the price will be pretty high. So these are basically flying taxis. They're kind of small helicopter type machines. All the testing has been done. They've been on display over the last few weeks here in the UAE, and it has now been confirmed that in Al Ain this summer they will be trying those flying taxis out for the first time.
The future is here. We'll check back with you in the summer when that gets rolled out. One final story from you, Inzi. The saying that there's an app for that is an old one, but there is a new spin on it from the region. You can now order yourself a sacrificial goat or lamb.
Yeah, of course, we've got Eid coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Huge holiday out here in the UAE. But I love this story. This is something that actually came into force last year, and I've just seen it once again pop on my delivery app. Kareem, which is one of the popular delivery companies out here, you get all your groceries, any takeaways, you can even order your taxis from the app, have now got big banners on their application where they're saying, we are back. Get your lamb, your sheep, your goat by a click of a button. So if I just click on the app right now for you, Chris, I can go on here. I can buy a Kashmiri goat, which is about 12 to 24 months old, about 14 to 17 kg, and I can get that for 1,723 dirhams. If I do the calculation in pounds, that's probably just north of around 400 pounds or so for a Kashmir goat. A Jaziri sheep, that will cost you just shy of 2,000 dirhams, which is around 500 pounds. That's a 17 to 20 kg. Or a local goat, a bit cheaper, that's 1,820 dirhams. Now, you might be thinking, and they've got quite cute pictures of these goats and sheeps on the app as well. But when you actually click on it, what it does say is you can pre-order or donate a cut of choice and choose a preferred delivery date from available slots. You can get a whole carcass delivered to yourself, or you can donate it, or you can get around 8 to 16 cuts or whatever it is that you want. So whilst there are very cute pictures of these goats and sheeps on this app, it means that you won't actually have a sheep turning up to your front door. You'll get the cuts instead.
Get your orders in now. Inzaman Rashid, thank you very much for joining us from the UAE. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally on today's show to some in-house news, because Monocle's sister publication, Konfekt, I suppose we can call that in-house, it's headed to production for its summer issue, and joining us to talk about it is Sophie Grove, Konfekt's editor. Good afternoon, Sophie.
Good afternoon.
So there is so much to talk about here, as you said at the top of the show. It is summer. Let's start with, you've gone for a new look diary.
So our tone section, which is the very front of the magazine, we've really sort of reimagined it. So it's packed full of reflections on things you can do in summer. There's an amazing piece by Francesca Gavin about artists and art exhibitions that are all about en plein air, these artists painting in jungles and by the sea. There's another piece on visiting exhibitions while you're on holiday, that kind of perception change where you see colour differently, where you've got sand sort of between your toes, but you kind of leave the lounger and just nip into the cool of an art gallery. How do the abstract canvases kind of sort of appear to you in that state of mind?
Are you saying we can't quite do that here in London, Sophie?
It's a real ode to the holiday. It's a kind of this high summer kind of dreamy spirit that filters through the whole issue.
That is very nice. It's a nice opening. So go behind that, further into the issue. I am going to start with this overnight trains. I do wish I was sent for this story. Tell us about that.
Well, Chiara Ramella, who's our deputy editor, did this story, and it's an amazing train. It goes from Budapest to the Adriatic overnight. And I've actually done this journey myself, but one of the most beautiful things about it is that they've revived this wonderful dining carriage, which used to be used by the Hungarian management section of the postal service in the 1980s. So when you're there, it's like this incredible sort of 80s, sort of slightly kind of Soviet vibes, but beautiful lamps and lighting and white tablecloths, but sort of really sort of absolutely exquisite cabin. And then you just have this pilgrimage, so you're in the sort of watery spa sort of sense of the Danube, and then you go down to Hvar, where she ends up on a little island just there in Croatia.
I love a good dining carriage, I gotta say. I mean, I do that a bit in Germany with Deutsche Bahn. They still have like actual table service on their trains, but it's a dying art, isn't it?
It is, but actually this piece is also a really interesting insight into how routes are being revived and restored. And there's a huge Austrian push to kind of get Europe connected by night train, because the time doesn't really exist. You're asleep most of it, so the journey vanishes. You have these wonderful stories to tell. There's this wonderful rhythm of the rails and sleeping, and there's an epic sense to it. So the story is all about that too.
The overnight train is being revived. Well, one other aspect, Sophie, you were talking before about sort of the joy of going to an exhibition in the summer when you're on holiday. The other aspect of that is the holiday home, if you just want a long holiday.
Well, this is it. Our design section has some beautiful homes. One's in Ibiza, which is kind of more brutalist. One's on the Costa Brava, sort of hewn into the rock, down on a little cove. It's really about sort of that playful, not too serious sense of little sort of curiosities and rattan and maybe a few kind of little boats around on the corner. It's just a sense of joy that you have in a holiday home. It's really about sort of inhabiting that sense of your holiday self, and it's about colour and stripes and dips in the sea. So our design section has some beautiful chair makers and Forte de Marme making the kind of directors' chairs, and we look into some of the craft as well. But I think it's really nice just to kind of leave your grown-up life behind and escape to another world.
And speaking of your holiday self, Sophie, what should we wear when we are playing our holiday selves?
So we shot an amazing story which really captures some of the best looks of the season in Cairo. It's a real sort of, we're out on the streets of Cairo and there's some beautiful looks, very sort of crisp shirting, very like flowing dresses. There's a real 70s feeling to a lot of the collections. Chloe, we featured in the tone with these incredible hats. There's some wonderful headgear, I have to say. So, and we also have our own Konfekt hat coming out with which is really something to look out for. Just that lot of shade, a big brim.
Ooh,
you can stuff it in your bag.
That.
Yeah,
I'm looking for that. I need a big brim to protect my face from the sun.
So that's
Would
a
you recommend this
collaboration.
for me?
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's always that moment where you kind of shower at the end of the day and put on some beautiful outfit that really is that sense of apéro. So a lot of the outfits as well and the ensembles are really kind of those moments of cocktail, those moments of glamour and elegance as the evening approaches.
Just finally, Sophie, after all that glamour, you're parading down the boardwalk, you're showing yourself off in your holiday home, you just want to go to the beach, you want to sit down for a long read.
You do, and we have some great essays. So one of them is just a really nice sort of, it's written by the former editor of Greek Vogue, and it's about how the Odyssey is this incredibly epic story and probably the best travel story ever told, but what it means to her as a Greek person, resilience, hospitality, this wily sense, and it's a really almost a call to arms. And then we have some just lovely dreamy escapes, but there's also a piece about oceanography and space travel. One of the only people who's been to the depths of the ocean and to the moon, Kathy Sullivan.
That is an extreme range right there.
And what do those experiences have in common, you might ask? And you can read all about it in Konfekt's summer issue.
Summer issue, which comes out on the 4th of June. Just a couple weeks to wait for that. Sophie Grove, Konfekt's editor, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Anita Riotta. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks, and our studio manager was Lily Austin. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye and thanks for listening.